Public CEO Report is a podcast that provides insights about the public sector and public policy for the benefit of decision makers and leaders powering our communities. I'm your host, Ryder Todd Smith, and today we're joined by Ken Pulskamp, Executive Director of the California City Management Foundation, otherwise known as CCMF, and a retired city manager. CCMF is a nonprofit organization that supports excellence in the city management profession. Ken, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Ryder. How you doing?
I am fired up and fantastic. It's a great day to be in America.
Always is.
Always. So let's start it off a little bit. Our audience is primarily local government nerds, but let's talk first about the foundation. What is CCMF?
The California City Management Foundation is really the premier organization that supports city managers throughout California. And it's the only organization that does that. We have 5 roles that we fill. The first is to celebrate individual city managers. We provide awards for some of their accomplishments and recognize them when they do good work, which they regularly and consistently do. Second, we support policies that make for successful, manageable, and enduring cities. I mean, that's really what we want. Our goal is to have cities up and down throughout the state of California be successful, and the city manager plays a key role in that. Third, we ensure that the profession remains attractive to the best and brightest people in the state, and make it so that people continue to want to be city managers. Fourth, we help current and future city managers advance their careers. And finally, we encourage and support city managers when they come into difficult times, either in their city or personally or professionally.
So quite a broad mission there, but all focused on the city management profession itself, which the name would obviously imply. How big is CCMF? How many members do you have? What's your presence out there in the world?
The membership now stands just about 300. We have retired city managers, we have current city managers, and we have a number of assistant city managers, chief assistant city managers. And it's all throughout the state. So when we come together, either professionally or socially, we have managers that truly represent big, small, northern, southern cities, everything, you name it, throughout the state of California.
And I think for context, there are about 482 cities in the state of California or something along those lines. So
pretty close, yeah.
Just to put some context around, not that all 300 are actually city managers, but there's at least half the cities, the city managers in the state are affiliated or involved with the California City Management Foundation is kind of my rough sense of things.
That's right. And after they watch this podcast, I'm sure the remaining will join.
I mean, they would be fools not to, right? Come on, get on the party train.
That's certainly the way I see it.
Yes, absolutely. So I should actually, that is a nice segue. I should just note for the audience too that Tripepi Smith has had the honor of working with the California City Management Foundation since like 2001. We built an original website for the foundation and did a little bit of technology work over the years. And then about 2010 or so, kind of ramped up our support and work in cooperation with the City Management Foundation. So for my company that I co-own with my wife, Tripepi Smith, actually the California City Management Foundation has been our longest client that we've had since we kind of got started. So a long history of working with CCMF.
And I'd like to add that you and your organization has done a phenomenal job for us, as you have for so many cities throughout California, that you really have advanced the whole profession as your leadership and the strategic thinking for municipalities, your work with promoting cities and technology, and you've been an absolute pleasure to work with, Ryder. So thank you for your leadership.
That is very kind of you, Ken. Not I didn't expect that, but that's very. I appreciate that very much. Next time I see you, I owe you a good beer.
Love it.
So does CCMF, let's go back to CCMF and talk a little bit more about the organization. So we talked about how we support the city management profession and kind of round it out in all sorts of ways, including advocating for the profession. What does that mean in terms of the work you guys do at the state legislature? What do you advocate for?
You know, since we are a nonprofit foundation, we are precluded from lobbying the legislators, but we do go up at least annually and educate them. That believe it or not, a lot of them really don't understand who city managers are, what we do, and they certainly are not, or before we started doing this, we're not familiar with the work of the California City Management Foundation. So it's really an opportunity for us to introduce ourselves to the individual legislators, particularly the ones that are involved with local government, and let them know that we're a resource for them. So when they have questions about what's going on in a city, what's going on with the city council, with the city manager, that they can contact me or any members of my board, and we stand ready to help them get straight answers and help them work through whatever issue that they are involved with.
You had mentioned your board. So could you just take 30 seconds and talk about the governance structure of CCMF? You serve as the executive director, but there is a board, correct?
Right. I'm the executive director. We have a board of about 15, most of whom are city managers, one of whom is an assistant city manager. And then we have 5 or 6 private sector members, because we've always been about partnerships, and city managers and certainly the foundation can't do our work without partnering with the sponsors, and so that has been very helpful to us.
So one other thing you talked about there was just explaining what city managers are to the legislature. I reflect back on a story where my father-in-law was a city manager, and I think my daughter was talking to a and explaining that her father was a city manager, and her friend turned to her and said, well, does he want to someday become the mayor? And my wife, she was like, no. And that's not to denigrate the role of the mayor, but it just demonstrates a fundamental misperception of what the role is of the city manager versus the mayor. And of course, this also gets into a whole discussion of strong mayor versus within a kind of an executive authority versus a rotating mayor or council manager form of government. So let's just assume that for some members of our audience, this idea of the city manager is totally foreign. Can you just explain that city manager concept, what that means for that role, that city manager juxtaposed to the mayor, and how that might differ from a strong mayor city?
Sure. In a city, we have a mayor and typically 4 council members, although that varies with a small number of cities. The city council, they move around a lot. They're up for election typically every 4 years, and they come, they go in a lot of cities. The mayor actually rotates pretty much every year among the 5 city council members. In theory, they set the policy for the individual cities, and it is the city manager job to implement that policy. And that's the theory of the whole deal. But in reality, I think it's important to recognize that the city manager is really the trained professional. People get elected to city councils, they get appointed by the council as mayor, and they often don't know a lot about how cities run, nor should they be expected to. They are not the trained professional. But the city manager is. Typically, it's somebody who's worked in local government for years or for decades, understands the finances of a city, understands how different departments interact, understands how staff interacts with the council, how the council interacts with the community, and is very much able to run the day-to-day functions of a city. The city manager also in a lot of cities, particularly I'd like to say the most successful cities, provides stability that city managers can stay around for decades, whereas, as I mentioned, council members tend to come and go. The city manager also has a unique position where we watch out for the interest of all of the constituents of a city. That we don't have to get reelected. We aren't worried about who's Democrats, who's Republicans. That really we want what is best for all of the constituents within a individual city, and I think that makes us unique. So the typical analogy is if you're looking at a private sector firm, that the council is the board of directors and the city manager is the CEO. But as I mentioned, it does go quite a bit beyond that.
And I think, a couple important points from that I take away. Number one, the council typically gets to hire 2 positions in an organization directly. Now, charter cities are different. Usually bigger cities are charter cities. They can have directly elected mayors. There's a charter that defines certain roles and functions that could be different. But for the vast majority of cities in California, as you described, this idea of council members who are elected, and then among them, that council gets to make 2 selections. They get to hire a city attorney and they get to hire a city manager. And then from that point, the city manager will make all the hiring decisions within the organization beyond that. Police chief, community development director, public works director. And it's really the job of the city manager to manage that infrastructure, the bureaucracy, to use the appropriate term, sometimes considered a pejorative. And at the same time, it's the role of the council to set tone, direction, policy, get that to the city manager so that city manager can then convey it through to the rest of the organization. Is that a fairly accurate description?
Perfect.
So you talked about stability. I reflect on the fact that we're around this time right now. Actually, the city manager from Torrance is retiring. I can't actually, his name is eluding me right now, which kills me, but I'm sure you know his name.
Leroy Jackson.
Thank you. Yeah. So Leroy is probably has been one of the longest serving city managers in California. I feel like he's going 30 plus years in the position or something like that in the city of Torrance, and he just recently retired. But he's an anomaly, right? The city manager, I think the general rule of thumb is about a 2.5 year tenure in the work that they do. Now, obviously, there are a lot who go for a long time. My father-in-law was 28 years straight in one city. So certainly there are people who have that tenure, but it can be a tumultuous position. Could you talk a little bit about some of those strains that exist around the city management profession and why city managers, if people read the media, city managers they also find themselves on a rotation cycle every now and then?
You bet, but I think it's important to know that when people talk about that short tenure of a city manager, a lot of times that includes somebody who has worked for a city for a number of years, has gone up through the department head ranks, or has been an assistant city manager within that city for a long period of time, and then concludes their career with a few years in the city manager seat. So even though that would count as only 3 years as being a city manager, they actually have been with the city for a number of years. That being said, Ryder, it's a very difficult position. And if you look at a department head works for one person, the city manager. And that city manager, by definition, has a lot of experience being a supervisor. They've been trained. They understand municipal government, and they're really professionally required to adhere to a code of ethics. Not so for a city manager. A city manager reports to 5 people, typically, that many of whom have not had any experience in running cities. And they often run on a platform of, hey, if I get elected, I'm going to get rid of the city manager. I'm going to fire the city manager. So they've gone out to the community and promised that. And a lot of them don't even understand. They don't have the authority to fire the city manager. They can't do anything without another 2 votes. So they get on the city council, and then they start finding out more about what the city manager is, what they do, why they do it. And a lot of them then either want to stick with their platform or want to do something else. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, typically on a council, any 3 people want the city manager fired, and the city manager's the hired gun, and they're going to be out looking for a new job. So all the city managers understand that. That goes with the territory, and that's the way the system works. The city manager is not directly responsible to the electorate like the council is.
Yeah.
And the electorate puts in the city council, and the city council has the authority to do what they feel is in the best interest of the community, whether the manager agrees or not.
Yeah, and my observation would be, I mean, I often see these kind of almost organizational charts in cities that city managers put together, and they're always very clear. Like they'll have the worker bees and the directors, and then they report up to the city manager, and that city manager reports to the council. But above that council is the public, right? And so the public servant model is very much ingrained into the profession. I think city managers recognize that while they have a professional career to execute on, they ultimately it is in a public service capacity, and the powers that be rightly are democracy, representative government, the election of council members who then have that oversight function and that oversight responsibility, frankly, to help manage that organization and find the right executive talent and make sure that the organization is well run. Right. I guess when you some people talk about the impact of the city manager in organizations, and there have been examples of what I would describe as bad apple city managers that have certainly been in headlines in the past and caused problems, and they are few and far between, but they exist. And sometimes I've had people talk to me about that city manager as indicative of a broader problem or some sort of corruption. And I always, or like the city manager function itself is some issue. And I always actually take a totally contrarian viewpoint, which is maybe my personality. But I look at that and say, look at the impact of having a bad city manager. If you want to know the impact of hiring a bad city manager, look at those bad apples and the negative impact they've had in the communities where they've been allowed to run amok for a year or a couple years or a decade long. And the lack of oversight, frankly, that they had from a elected city council to make sure they were on the right track. I mean, to me, those bad apples always demonstrate why it's so important to hire a competent, ethical, highly professional city manager who's going to be driven on a day-to-day basis to keep the mission of the organization focused, keep it on track, and drive to meet the needs of all those constituencies that you were just talking about. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great point, Ryder. A lot of times city councils will call me up in my role as the executive director of the California City Management Foundation. And they'll say, hey, we're in the process of hiring a city manager, but they want $5,000 more than we want to pay. And even though that's kind of the going rate with other cities, like similar cities around us, it's an extra $5,000. We don't want to do that. What do you think? And I consistently tell them that is a bad place to try to save money, that is going to be the single most important decision they make as a council member. And it's not the place to save $5,000. Any city manager worth their salt is going to make that city hundreds, if not thousands of times that amount of money every year. And they need to go out and get the best city manager they can afford. And sometimes I'll liken it to buying a house. You might not want to pay what the seller wants, but the fact of the matter is, and any homeowner would agree, that if you're talking about a few $1,000s on your dream home, it doesn't really make sense to not get the home you want for a small amount of money. So I always encourage them to get the city manager that they like, that's a good fit for them, that's a good fit for their community, and they will see as they go through the incoming years or the coming years that that was a decision well made. So you're right, Ryder. There have been a couple of bad apples, but it is in a sea of city managers that have had tremendously positive impacts on communities up and down the state of California, and indeed around the world. And it's an honorable profession. And nobody hates to see a bad apple city manager more than city managers themselves. And so we do everything we can to root those out and make it so that individual city managers are squeaky clean. We hold them to the highest professional, ethical, integrity standards we can. And if you look at the profession as a whole, I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish.
What talk a little bit about your role as an executive director and the kind of member support you offer, right? So we talked a lot about council members. Let's turn and talk about some of those other phone calls you get. What role do you play in supporting? I mean, I know you'll take calls from non-CCMF members too, because you're all in on the profession, but certainly when members call, what do they call about? What are their questions? How do you help them out?
Well, it might be easier to talk about what they don't ask about. I mean, they really cover the gamut. But a lot of times they are city managers that are having problems. They're having, a specific problem, maybe something with their budget or an individual issue with the city that they want to talk to somebody about who's had experience and kind of walk them through it. And I guess I'm like a counselor. I try not to tell them what to do as much as ask them specific questions so that they can figure out in their own mind what the right thing is for them and for their community. And a lot of times they also call up with personal problems because it is a job that generates personal problems. Typically, city managers spend so much time and energy at work that it can have an impact on them from a health perspective, from a marital perspective, from a psychological perspective. And they want to have a discussion about work-life balance, or am I the only one that's experiencing this? And I think they're comforted by, again, somebody who is not a counselor that really doesn't get the city manager job and the gig and what they're going through. God knows I have empathy when I have these discussions with these people going through this turmoil, but also that can kind of explain to them what a decent and healthy level of balance is between the job and the life that they're having. So it really covers the gamut, but those are kind of the two main categories I think the calls come in. I sometimes wish when I had these calls that I'd taken a couple more psychology classes in college because they really do struggle, but they struggle because they take their job so seriously. And they want to do what's best for their community without it sending them to the grave or, the insane asylum. So they really grapple with what the right thing to do is. And I do whatever I can to help them get through that. Yeah.
You made an interesting point there too. One of the things about cities is cities are geography, right? They are a physical spot. And this is not a job where you can be the city manager of a city in Northern California from Southern California. So typically when you hire a city manager, there oftentimes could be a move involved. That move involved will affect a spouse and children if there's children involved. So for city managers, they're all in on positions, and it usually involves a family move. So it's a big commitment, which is, I think, adds to that level of both commitment and the stress level that goes along with making those transitions and going through the job transitions. And I know that a lot of the discussions that City Management Foundation has done in supporting city managers, also some work helping them collaborate with their spouses and partners on making those kinds of trying to keep that home life solid and together at the same time that they're making career moves to find the next community to go to do some work in. So.
Ryder, that's an issue. I mean, I talked recently with a city manager that just switched jobs, moved his family probably 600 miles across the state, bought a new house, and then the job didn't work out. And 6 months later, they're being terminated. So anybody who has a house knows you buy and sell a house in the same year, and you're going to lose a lot of money, and then you don't have a paycheck coming in, and typically your spouse is not real happy about the whole situation, that they've had to leave their friends and their community and move to another place, and now you want them to move again, and it really ends up being very traumatic. And that's the risk that city managers take when they take one of these new jobs. So it can be very, very stressful, not only for the employee, but the employees' families and the kids too are switching schools.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one thing to just appreciate as a council member, with all respect for their function as a governing body with ultimate responsibility to the constituency. I mean, that there's no denying that that's the right democratic process and representative government process we have for governance. But the city managers make note of the fact that council members are often council members for 10 to 20 hours a week, right? Doing their, and it's not like it's well paid. I mean, let's to be clear, city council members generally don't get well paid. So it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on their part to represent, but they also have jobs or they're retired, something outside of being a city council member. Whereas for the city manager and all those staff that work at City Hall, that is what they do all day, right? Along their 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week of working on that job. So it's for them, it's everything. And for the council members, it is council service is a part of a broader life of things they have going on. It's actually a smaller slice of their overall life relative to that council member. So it's just a different perspective of when they sit down to have a conversation with each other. They might be coming at it from two different perspectives about where things are at as an organization and as kind of each of their functions and what they're doing.
That's right. Being a city manager, it's not a part of your life. It's your life. It's who you are. And it's not just that you run the organization, the municipal structure of the city hall part of it, but you're going to functions over the weekends, at nights, going to council meetings and public meetings, regularly getting home, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. And, you just eat, sleep, and breathe city management. So that ends up being a lifestyle that's hard on the individual, and it can be hard on the family of the manager as well. So we all recognize that and try and support one another and support the families too, because we know that they go through the trials and tribulations as much as the manager. And as awful as it is to see rotten things written about you in the local paper, or on a TV ad, or certainly in social media, I think sometimes it's worse for the spouse to see about the one they love. And I know it's worse on the kids that are at the playground or at lunch, and some other kid comes up to him and says, "Hey, I hear your dad's going to get fired. He must not be very good." That's hard. I mean, and that's a reality that these managers live with throughout the profession.
Yeah. Yet they endure. Yet they go on. Right, city managers. There's a, as you noted earlier, there's a huge swath of talented professionals out there who are trying to make communities better every day, and strong city management talent ultimately leads to more effective city organizations, which leads to more effective and better supported communities, right? I mean, there is a symbiotic relationship here. And I've always been impressed with the city management profession's investment in the future generations of city managers. Like CCMF, you guys have the New and Future City Manager Seminar, which is hugely popular. So I'll have you talk about that in a second. But then you have organizations like MMA-SC and MMA-NC, which really are kind of early funnels into the city management profession of exposing 20 and 30-year-olds to city management world and the city management office function, so that by the time they achieve late 30s, 40s, 50s, which is typically when people rise to the city management position, they get that opportunity they've seen a lot and they're able to kind of step in and have that worldview that's necessary to function as a city manager. So I just actually alluded real quick to CCMF's New and Future City Manager Seminar, which, as I mentioned, is super popular. Could you, This year, due to COVID, unfortunately, I think you guys have had to cancel that, correct?
That's correct.
But on a normal year, when there isn't a pandemic going on, it is a very popular program. So could you take us through a little bit about the New and Future City Manager Seminar and who applies, who gets in, and what that process is like, and then what the general curriculum consists of?
Right. We've been doing the New and Future City Manager Symposium for, I don't know, probably about 20 years now. And we have typically 2 to 3 times as many people apply as we have room for it. And we end up selecting somewhere between 20 and 25 people who go away for a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And we have a symposium where we talk about being a city manager. And it is led by myself and a number of other current, typically longer-term city managers and retired city managers. So we give these younger professionals that either are city managers recently appointed or more than likely are soon to be appointed city managers. And we give them the down and dirty of what it's like to be a city manager. We spend a lot of time talking about the topic we just covered of work-life balance. We spend a lot of time talking about ethics and integrity and how important it is to 100% of the time conduct yourself in a way that is going to make you and the people around you proud. We give them an opportunity to ask us questions and have interaction with themselves. And it ends up being a very positive event, so that when they leave on Sunday afternoon, they've really gotten close to the facilitators as well as to the other participants. And typically these groups still interact with one another years later, and it ends up being a very meaningful part of their career. We've had a lot of those people go on to be wildly successful city managers, and people are always looking forward to the next symposium.
So it sounds like, as a pro tip to the council members out there, should you find yourself in a situation where you recently hired a fresh city manager, in other words, it's their first city manager gig, or you have somebody inside the organization who you are hoping to build a pipeline for them to become the next city manager when the current city manager retires, that would be the kind of seminar that you'd probably want to support your person going to help them out and launch them to be as successful as possible.
Yeah, there's no question about that, Ryder, but I can definitely say the word is out. Because, like I say, we have a lot more people that want to go than we have spots for. And I think it also is indicative of who these people are that become city managers. And I think about that. They are giving up their Friday evening, all day, all night, Saturday. I mean, when I say all day, I mean, we start at 8 o'clock in the morning. And at the end of the regular session, we go out to dinner and typically aren't back to the hotel till 10 or 11 o'clock at night. We're back at it on Sunday morning. We go through the sessions on Sunday. And then they go home back to their family, wherever they are throughout the state. And they're back at work on Monday.
Right.
With no pay, nothing. And other than learning about how to do their jobs better. So I think it really says something about who the people are, that not only are they willing to do it, but when we call up these people and tell them that they've been accepted, you would think we're telling them that they just got a scholarship to Harvard. And they're really excited about going.
Speaking of which, actually, that is something else that CCMF does, right? Is you guys support some scholarship for ongoing education. I think you have a couple scholarships. Could you talk about that real quick too, and then we'll transition to a couple final points I want to cover, and we'll wrap it up. But can you talk about that?
Good job of hitting that softball. I love too.
Yeah. I learned well, Ken. I learned from you.
Great transition.
Thank you.
We It ties into the conversation we've been having about new and future city managers. Is we do a lot to work with people that want to be city manager. Sometimes we have people go through this stuff, hear about all this, and go, "I don't want to be a city manager. That sounds horrible. I'm not even happy. I'm giving up my weekend," which to me is fine. I would rather have them learn that before they take the job than after they've gotten the job. So we do a lot. We give out a lot of scholarships to people that are going to school, that are learning, looking for their master's in public administration. Typically, we do a number of scholarships for people that want to be interns, so that they can go to a city and typically spend a summer working closely with the city manager, the city manager's office, and getting the real lowdown on what it's like to work in the local government and what it's like to be a city manager. We also give 3 typically scholarships to Harvard for our members to go and study leadership at the John F. Kennedy School of Leadership at Harvard University, which all of the people have gone rave about. So that's the types of things we can do when people become members, when sponsors support the California City Management Foundation, so that we can continue to get the best and the brightest people into our profession and take the people who are already in our profession and make them the best that they can be.
Yeah, it's great work. It's great work that you guys do on that front. Truly advancing on the motto of excellence in the city management profession. I should have asked you this way back at the start of this conversation, but you actually had a career before being the executive director of the California City Management Foundation. So just for people to understand your bona fides in this space, what did you do before you were executive director of CCMF for that chunk of your career?
Well, let me give you a thumbnail sketch of my career. I would like to say, in 3rd grade, I was inspired to be a city manager, and that's all I've ever wanted to do. But that would be a bold-faced lie. The fact of the matter is, my economics professor in my university told me the day I was graduating that there was an internship opening up in the city manager's office for the city of Fresno, which I was kind of nonplussed about. But then I found out it paid 50 cents an hour more than I was currently making. So I was all in. Well, I went and applied for the internship. I got it. And I got to say, in all sincerity, I was hooked very quickly. That for me, it really fit who I am and what I wanted to do with my personal and professional life. There was an opportunity to help individuals, to help families, to help communities, to build a legacy, and provide a lifetime of meaningful service. So I ended up spending 7 or 8 years with the city of Fresno, left as a deputy city manager, moved to Bakersfield as their assistant city manager, which was the number 2 spot in the city. And then I went on to the city of Santa Clarita, where I spent 25 years as their assistant city manager and the city manager. And since then, I've been the interim city manager for the city of Burbank, as well as the city of Palmdale. So all of that, it just really has made me fall in love with this profession, be in love with this profession, and has really been just a wonderful, wonderful career. And now I've been running the California City Management Foundation for the last 6 or 7 years, which is cool. It's an opportunity to still see my buddies in the profession, hang out with people like you, Ryder, and keep my mitts in the issues that local government is dealing with without having to get into the fist fights that city managers regularly find themselves in.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I do say that's one thing. I mean, I have not had the honor of serving as a city manager, but in my role in the work that we do at Tripepi Smith, I really love the idea that the work we do exposes us to all the rubber meets the road policy areas and problem solving difficulties that society faces, and gives us a chance to have literally a front row seat to what's going on in society in America. I think it's one of my great joys about the job and the work that we get to do at Tripepi Smith. So
that's good to hear.
All right, so I just building off that experience, I want to close with this kind of nuanced question, but if you were talking to council members, not your own council members, just council members in general, elected officials, and you wanted to give them advice on how to best work with, collaborate with, or get the most out of their city manager, what would be your observation? What would be your recommendations to them, right?
Well, I think one is get to know and trust and have a close relationship with your city manager. That my experience is, if you're a council member and you want to get your agenda accomplished, you want to give your constituents what you promised them you would give them, you want to get accomplished what are the reasons why you became a council member in the first place, which is a very difficult job as well, you're going to rely on the city manager. And if you have a relationship where you can go to the city manager and say, hey, I want to be able to have more recreation programs for our community's youth, what's the best way to do that? And do it in collaboration with the city manager. Your chances of getting that funded and being successful are wildly greater if you've got a city manager that you have rapport with and have developed a relationship with. The other thing is, a lot of times city council members play one-upsmanship with their fellow council members. And that is a mistake. I talked about the relationship with the city manager. The other very important relationship is the one that they have with their fellow council members. That an individual council member can get virtually nothing accomplished. If they want to get something accomplished, they need the votes of 2 or hopefully 3 or 4 other council members. So I'm regularly reminding council members that those other 4 people that they share the dais with are the foremost important constituents that they have. So if you see a successful city, typically it's one that has a lot of stability, where the council members don't necessarily agree with one another, but they're able to disagree agreeably, have lively and constructive and respectful debates with their fellow council members as well as with their city manager. So really to focus on those relationships and never break the plate. I mean, if you end up embarrassing a council member, embarrassing the city manager, a lot of times you end up with a relationship where it's just very difficult to move forward. And like we all remember from our childhood fairy tales, once Humpty Dumpty's broken, it's really difficult to put them back together again.
Yeah, that's some excellent advice. I mean, first of all, it's interesting just hearing that discussion in the context of where we're at as a society today and our seeming inability to talk civilly when we disagree about something. But the second point is, ultimately those fellow council members and your city manager are your team of people who are trying to get things done in the community. And you need to treat them as, I would argue, you need to treat them as teammates. Not even if you disagree on something, you still need to have teammates to get to the end game, to get to the end zone, to score that touchdown, so to speak. So
I think that's really a good analogy, and one I've used before, Ryder. If you're on a basketball team and you have one of the people on your team that you hate, if you want to be a good team, you pass that person the ball when they're open. And if you want to get even with them and not give them a ball when they should have it, everybody pays the price.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Ken, I want to thank you very much for taking time today to visit with us and for your work at the California City Management Foundation and for your long public service career working in local governments. It's really, for me personally, it's been great to get to know you through the work that we do and have all your insights and experience kind of shared with me, and your good sense of humor too. Everybody knows you're one for a good joke every now and then. So thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ryder.
So, and that's today's report. I want to thank again Ken for being here with us today. From the whole PublicCEO team and myself, Ryder Todd Smith, thank you for your time. We'll catch you on the next episode. We hope you learned something new and inspiring that'll help you in your public service. Remember, PublicCEO has a daily newsletter that is free to those who sign up at PublicCEO.com. If you have feedback, questions, or guest suggestions for PublicCEO Report, please email alex@PublicCEO.com.